February 1959. 9 experienced hikers vanish on a remote Russian mountainside. When search teams finally find them, nothing makes sense. Their tent has been sliced open from the inside. Some are found half naked in the snow as if they tore off their own clothes. One climbed a tree so high the branches snapped under him, for reasons no one has ever explained. 2 of the bodies are missing their eyes. One is missing her tongue, and traces of radiation are found on their clothing. The Soviet Union investigated, sealed the files, and closed the case with only 3 words: a compelling natural force. 65 years later, nobody has ever fully explained what really happened that night. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. On January 23, 1959, 10 young hikers set out from Sverdlovsk in the Soviet Union on a skiing expedition through the northern Ural Mountains. Most were students or graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, and all were experienced outdoorsmen. This was a grade 3 hiking route, the most difficult classification in the Soviet system at the time. Their goal was to reach Otorten Mountain, roughly 200 miles north of Sverdlovsk, and return safely by mid-February. Their group leader was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. The expedition would later take his name. A few days in, one member, Yuri Yudin, developed knee and back pain and turned back early. It was a decision that saved his life. He would be the only member of the original 10 to survive. The remaining 9 pressed on. On February 1st, according to their own diaries and photographs, the group began ascending the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kolatyakal, which translates ominously to Dead Mountain. They made a navigational error, drifted off course, and rather than losing elevation to reach the safety of the tree line, they made camp directly on the open slope. It was the last decision they would ever document. The group had planned to send a telegram to their sports club roughly 3 weeks after departure. When February 20th came and went with no word, alarmed friends and family pushed for a search. Volunteers, soldiers, and aircraft were dispatched into the mountains. On February 26th, the search team found the tent, half collapsed under snow, on the open slope exactly where the group had made their final fateful campsite. One of the searchers who reached the tent that day later described the moment.
"We expected to find them huddled inside, cold but alive, maybe injured. Instead, we found the tent torn open and empty. Nobody said anything for a while. We just stood there looking at it."
What they found next didn't look like an accident. It looked like a scene of panic. The tent had been cut open, not through the entrance, but through the fabric itself, from the inside. Investigators found boots, warm coats, and personal belongings still neatly inside. Food had been left mid-preparation. Whatever happened, it happened fast enough that experienced winter hikers left behind the exact gear that would have kept them alive. Outside, footprints in the snow showed that 8 or 9 people had fled the tent on foot, some in socks, some barefoot. Heading downhill toward the tree line, over a mile away, in temperatures that likely fell below -25°C that night. Investigators would later determine, through forensic analysis of the fabric, that the cuts had been made from inside the tent, not by an outside attacker cutting in. A young investigator assigned to the case in 1959 later recalled the moment that changed the direction of the inquiry.
"We brought in a seamstress to look at the tent, just to help catalog the damage. She barely glanced at it before she said with total confidence, 'These cuts were made from inside.' That one sentence changed everything we thought we knew."
Something inside that tent convinced 9 experienced winter hikers that they needed to escape immediately, without their boots, without their coats, into a mountainside night that would kill them. Near the tree line, searchers found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko, under a large cedar tree with no shoes. The tree's branches were broken up to about 5 meters high, suggesting one of them had climbed it, possibly to see something or to escape something. Back toward the tent, 3 more bodies were found scattered between the cedar and the tent, including Igor Dyatlov himself, apparently having tried to make his way back. All 5 of these early discovered hikers were ruled to have died of hypothermia. The remaining 4 bodies weren't found until May, when the snow finally melted, buried in a ravine under several meters of snow, far deeper into the forest, and these 4 had injuries that hypothermia alone couldn't explain. One had major skull damage. 2 others had severe chest trauma, injury so significant that the force involved was later compared to that of a car crash, without any external skin wounds to match. A crack in the skull of the 4th completed the group. Stranger still, 3 of these 4 bodies showed damaged soft tissue around the head and face. 2 were missing their eyes. 1 was missing her tongue. 1 had also lost her eyebrows. The Soviet investigation's official bewildering conclusion: the hikers had died as a result of an unknown compelling force. That vague phrase left the door wide open for decades of alternative theories, and one of the more persistent is the idea that something not entirely human was involved. The Ural Mountains have their own long folklore around a Bigfoot-like creature, sometimes called the Mank by the local Mansi people. Some investigators point to the injuries themselves: blunt, immense force with no clear weapon, and the strange, targeted damage to the eyes and tongue, as details that don't fit a simple weather event, but could fit an animal or unknown creature attack. Others go further, tying it to the reported orb and unidentified aerial sightings in the region that same week, speculating that whatever was seen in the sky and whatever was encountered on the ground that night were somehow connected. Adding to the strangeness, testing on some of the hikers' clothing reportedly showed elevated traces of radiation. In a closed Soviet society already primed for distrust of its own government, this detail exploded into speculation. Secret weapons testing, a military cover-up, even sightings by other witnesses in the area of a bright orange sphere moving through the sky the same week. For decades, the leading natural explanation was a straightforward avalanche. But that theory had real problems. The search team found no obvious avalanche debris. The slope where the tent stood measured well under the angle typically needed to trigger one. And the theory couldn't explain why an avalanche would strike hours after the tent was pitched, in the middle of the night, with no fresh snowfall to trigger it. In 2021, 2 Swiss researchers, a snow physicist and a geotechnical engineer, proposed a more precise mechanism: a small delayed slab avalanche. Using digital modeling combined with data borrowed from real automotive crash test research, they found that strong local winds, called katabatic winds, could have gradually built up a slab of snow on the slope above the tent, made unstable by the cut the hikers had made into the hillside to pitch it. Hours later, that slab could release suddenly, not enough to bury the campsite, but enough to strike the hikers with tremendous localized blunt force while they lay in the tent, matching the specific chest and skull injuries found on the 4 bodies in the ravine. Russian authorities reopened the case twice, once in 2019, once again in 2020, and both times landed on some version of the avalanche or windstorm explanation as the most likely cause, closing the case again shortly after. But even as recently as 2023, new claims surfaced, including a theory linking the deaths to a failed Soviet rocket launch and a resulting explosion. A theory some surviving searchers and victims' relatives found more convincing than the wind and snow slab explanation, partly based on their own memory of the terrain and reports of a fireball crossing the sky that same night. 65 years later, official Russia considers this case closed. Unofficially, it may never really be. 9 experienced hikers, a tent cut open from the inside, injuries that still don't perfectly add up more than 60 years later. Was it wind and snow? or something the official record never fully explained? Let me know what you think really happened at Dyatlov Pass.